Hello there, and then welcome to the second day of Barcelona Design Week Summit here in sunny Barcelona. Thanks for joining us again. Hopefully some of you were able to join this morning for the workshops that we had running very early this morning. They were really great, and this afternoon we have some equally excellent talks lined up for you today. So thanks again for joining, and on that note, let's dive straight into it. So the first talk we have is going to be with Nick Stanhope. Nick is the founder of Shift, which is a UK non-profit organisation. What they do is they bring together design thinking and collective ways of working to help tackle inequalities. So Nick, if you're there, I'll just briefly introduce your talk. Nick's talk, The Collective Future of Social Design, is going to be looking at his experience leading social design projects and how he's experimented with radically different approaches. Hi, Nick. Can you hear me okay?
Hi.
Perfect.
I can.
Excellent. So thanks for joining us, Nick, and I'll hand it over to you for now, and I'll join you at the end for some questions.
Thanks very much, and thanks for that warm introduction. It's great to be here. Sadly, not in sunny Barcelona, but in slightly grim and locked down London. But still lovely to be involved in an event which the values and intentions of obviously resonate very strongly with me. I've been working in amongst social and environmental challenges and ambitions for about 20 years. For the first 10 years, I worked as a youth and community worker and a campaigner and activist. And for the last 10 years, I've worked as a designer of products and services related to issues such as mental health, financial well-being, early years development, and child obesity. And what I wanted to talk to you about, what I'm excited to talk to you about, is how, although I kind of gravitated towards and fell in love with design thinking and practice, for all the reasons that I'm sure many of you have as well, the way in which the mindset embraces failure. For someone working in a system with systems that are very complex and often dysfunctional, and where very little works, that's a critical principle and value. I've always loved I love the lightness of the prototyping and testing processes within design in again working within government and social sector systems that rely on very concrete planning and commissioning cycles, and love the use of data to learn and adapt, and the centrality of humans and their stories within the design process as well. I loved all of those things. I gravitated towards design, became a designer for those reasons. And after 10 years of working as a designer, and hopefully of generating products and services that I'm proud of, I still feel excited by the role of design thinking and practice, but over the last couple of years have felt less confident about some of its tendencies and priorities. And that has accelerated over the last 6 months because we've been faced in the UK and all over the world with one of the greatest design challenges of our generation, with the need to radically and often urgently redesign services and support for people to adapt to an incredibly challenging and often traumatic context due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There's been a new light shone on structural inequalities and injustices as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly racism. And the need for us to understand and respond to those structural inequalities has never been greater. So, however, I feel like the design has been at its best during this period of kind of traumatic transition and greater collective responsibility. I'm unsure, and I wanted to share with you an example of how we, as a design team working in London and in the US, have used really good standard design thinking and practices to try and understand and respond to the social problems that surround us, and then explore some of the frailties and limitations and flaws of that design thinking and practice, and point towards perhaps some different principles and values that need to flow into design if we're going to be better equipped to respond to the kind of crises and inequalities and injustices that we have been faced with over this last 6 months. So as always with design, I wanted to start by sharing a story from a process that we've worked with and that we've worked through. This is a boy who over a 2-week period a couple of years ago, we met in a chicken shop every afternoon in Birmingham, England's second largest city, and an area with very high levels of child poverty and child obesity. And we were there as designers, as ethnographers, trying to understand the relationship between unhealthy diets, and particularly unhealthy takeaway food, and high rates of child obesity, high rates of type 2 diabetes, in the context of what has resembled a pandemic in some ways of child obesity. It has grown very quickly over the last few years. Now in the UK, about 20% of 30% of 11-year-olds are obese. Those rates have increased significantly over the last few years. Hospital admissions have gone up in cases related to obesity significantly over the last year. And when more data emerges around the kind of vulnerabilities and related to COVID-19, again, it is clear that obesity has really increased those.
I think. Hi, everybody. Apologies for the technical issues. This is one of the reasons why it's difficult to do these things fully online. We're back in the room anyway, and hopefully everybody's back online. So we are going to jump to the next speaker, Christian Fracassi. So Christian is a construction engineer and architect, and he's also the co-founder of Isanova, a research center and idea incubator. Christian is going to give us a talk on innovation in times of crisis. So Christian's talk will demonstrate why innovation isn't always difficult and takes years, highlighting 3 case studies he and his team have successfully executed during the current pandemic. Hi, Christian. Thanks for jumping in so quickly. Apologies for the technical issues.
It's not a problem. Hi, Adam, and hi, everyone. My name is Christian. I'm a civil engineer, and I'm 37 years old. I will show you my story because until 6 months ago, I were no one. And in this 60 months, we created 3 different kind of projects that helped a lot of people. So a lot of journal, also New York Times, spoke about us. So I will show you my screen so you can see my presentation. So we became famous with this image. This is Alessandro. It's one of my engineers that work with me. And the project was the snorkeling mask converted into a respiratory one. But from the beginning, who I am, I'm an engineer. I started studying when I was 21 years old, engineer. And at the end of the 5 year, I had a big idea. I don't know. I had my first idea that was on the frozen food. I'm a person who loves competition, so I try to create a lot of competition, Italian competition or international competition. And in some of them, I also the winner. And happened one time that one of them gave me like a prize, 5,000 euro. And I spent, they was my first money that can I learn. And what I decided to do with this money, I created my first patent. And after the day after, a journal wrote an article about me and about my idea. And a big entrepreneur, a business angel, decided to call me and tell me that my idea was good and he wanted to buy my idea. So I sell my first patent 2 days after I wrote it for 14,000 euro. But for me was enough, but also for the company was a very good price. But we also became friends, and just imagine that he came with me. It was on my left during my marriage with my wife. So now he's a very big friend. And he understands that I have a lot of ideas, and we can create a company whose name is Innova to develop ideas of me and also help other people, help innovators who have ideas and companies who want new ideas. But what we created, the first project we created is this one. What we are seeing are about 100 Venturi valve. You have to imagine that in the beginning of March, what happened? All the Brescia, the city where I come from in Italy, is in the north of Italy and was in the black zone. So we have to close all the restaurant, all the cinema, all the street, all the factories, all the companies was closed. So a lot of people start working at home, and on the 13th of March was the last day of work in our office. What happened? I received a call from the director of the newspaper of our city, And he told me that an hospital, the Chiari Hospital, that is an hospital 30 kilometers far from here, was in need of this kind of valve. These valves are objects that are connect a ventilator machine with a respiratory mask. And that kind of hospital have 122 patients COVID affected, and only 20 of them. And the company that usually produces this kind of object was not in need to give the pieces in the right time. So they were in emergency cases and asked me if I have some 3D printer able to create that kind of product. And we say, yes, if it is a very small product, we can create with our 3D printer. So what we have done, we went to the hospital, we take one used pieces, because they have only 20 of them. And we have only 20, they have only 20 of them. So we take one piece is used, we take all the measurement of the valve, and we rebuild again the 3D with our computer. And in the afternoon, we started printing some pieces. On the night, we arrived to the hospital. We take these 4 pieces to a doctor, and he created some tests, and he says, okay, well, they works. Give me 100, please. So we come back again, we switch on other 3D printer, and in about 24 hours, we printed 96 pieces. They looks like very easy and very simple, but they have a hole inside. I don't know if you can see me. Okay. Here there is a very thin hole. It's about 0.6 millimeter. So it's very, very thin. And with a traditional or also a professional 3D printer, it's not so easy to create a very thin hole or channel where oxygen passed through. And so we were in panic. What we do? We start printing them without creating a hole, and we made it using a micro milling machine used commonly for the jewelry sector. And so we created all the hole by hand, one by one. And on Sunday we went to the hospital and give all the pieces, all the 100 pieces, to the doctors that start using them. We created this project in 3 days, so we work day and night, Saturday and Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And we hope that we were very happy because we can help people to breathe. And only in 3 days we created a very important project. And a lot of newspapers started speaking about this idea and what we have done. In the image on the bottom, you can see me and Alessandro with the first 2 Venturi valve that was used on some patient COVID affected. We come back home, and I told my engineer that worked with me that finally they can stay at home for some weeks and work slowly and take their time because they work on Saturday and Sunday. But on the same day, the Sunday afternoon, a retired doctor that is 75 years old, whose name is Renato Favero, called me and say me, I'm a doctor, I have a new idea for you. I want to show you my idea. But I told him, it's a problem because all the company must be closed, also my office. So we can see only when the pandemic and the lockdown will be turned off. But he says, no, we have no time because I think that in a few days, hospital will not only need Venturi valve, but also respiratory masks. So I have an idea to create them using a snorkeling mask. So what happened? At the beginning of March, on Monday, he come here in our office, and I have to call some of my engineers, 5 of them, because we are in 14, and 5 of them come here in our office, and the doctor stay here about 2 hours. He told us how alveoli, how lungs works, and how the doctors try to cure the patient COVID affected, and using oxygen and the ventilation masks and the ventilation machine. And they say, okay, after 2 hours, you have all the basic competencies on medicine. I'm not an engineer, but you are. So I give you this mask, this snorkeling mask, that is one I have on my hand. And he take this one, and he say you, okay, goodbye, good luck, and try to do your best. So what we have done, in about 8 hours, we created an object that we call the Charlotte valve, that connected here on the top of the mask can connect the oxygen tube here and the filter and the pressure valve on the left. The first type of valve were created by a 3D printer. So this is a very small pieces. In about 2 hours, we created them. And what we have done, at the beginning, we called Decathlon, because at the beginning of March, we were still in winter. So we don't know if they have some of them in the supermarket or in the shop, because we need a lot of them. And if they have not yet produced it for the summer, it was a very big problem. But Decathlon was very surprised of our ideas, and they say, yeah, no problem. We have more than 100,000 masks on our storage, so only in Italy. So you can create your project without any problem. They also send us a lot of 3D file of their snorkeling mask. Just imagine that this kind of mask is the top product of their company. So and always without any agreement, any NDA. I have not to sign any piece of paper. Just in a day, also they send us 15 masks to do all the tests we need. And another thing we have done is to call the Chiari Hospital to ask them if they can help us, because we had a new idea, we have a new project, and we have to know if this kind of project work or not. So they try to help us, even if we were in a very bad situation. For 3 days, some doctor start testing this snorkeling mask, use it like a respirator mask. At the beginning, we start trying ourselves. In the top of image, you can see Alessandro that is doing some tests to understand if the oxygen pass very well or not, and if the pressure is right or not. On the center of the image, you can see some doctors that are using that kind of mask before using on a COVID patient. After that, after 3 days, they called me and they told me that the product and the project was good, and they need some snorkeling masks. But when we started this second project, only 4 hospitals in Italy were in need of masks, and they need about 20 masks for each hospital. So at the beginning, we thought that we have to create only 80 or 100 masks to complete our project. But in these 3 days where the hospital was doing the test, a lot of other hospitals start calling us that we were in need of masks. And the day after, the civil protection of our city called me that they have bought about 500 masks, so they need 500 Charlotte valve. And I spoke with my engineer, and they say, what we can do now? Because it's true that we have 6D printer, but we are not able to print all these pieces. They are too much for us. So we try to share. So we created a website. We put online the file, and thanks to some newspaper that wrote article, we try to pass this message. If you are a maker, if you have a 3D printer, switch on your 3D printer, download my file, and start printing Charlotte valve and donate them to the hospital. In only one day, we collected more than 2 million downloads of the file, and more than 16,000 makers start switch on their own 3D printer. And on Monday, we receive more than 100 and 200 pieces of Venturi valve, and come here, and we start giving for free, obviously, to the hospital. So the project became very, very big, because in the third day, a doctor in Brazil called me, and he told me that 100 patient was breathing thanks to my idea in Brazil. So only sharing a file. So and what we are doing at the end, just imagine that about 150,000 masks were used all over the world. 15,000 in Italy, 20,000 in Spain, 20,000 in Canada, 30,000 in France and Brazil, and all the other in Uzbekistan, Tunisia, Morocco, Philippines, Bolivia, UK, and a lot of other states. We spoke about with people from all over the world. And sharing the file, what we have, we saw that a lot of companies start downloading our file and remodeling, rebuilding, redesigning our valve, because obviously we created only in 8 hours. So my valve, it's not the better solution. It's not the better form to breathe. So I can show you here one pieces, because we found 21 different kind of Charlotte valve on the web, but the better one is this one. Also, Ferrari started using our idea and creating his own Charlotte valve that is obviously much more better than our, but both work very well and do their work. At the end of this project, that lasts about 3 months, some country like Zambia, Uzbekistan, Burkina Faso, Rwanda have called us, because they thought that the idea was very good also for them, but they have not the 3D printer, because they have snorkeling masks, because they are near the sea, so a lot of tourists can give them for free, but we have not the possibility to create a Charlotte valve. So what we have done, we created a crowdfunding project. We collected about 12,000 euros. We bought some 3D printer, and we sent for free to the hospital in that kind of country, most of them in Africa. So they start using the 3D printer. We created some courses using WhatsApp, because they have never seen this kind of product, so they are not able to use a 3D printer. So we try to learn them how to use the filament, how to change the filament, how to print the pieces, and so on. So what I can say you, what I learned from these 3 projects. The first word is confidence, because We had confidence in the doctor that called us that Sunday, because he told me I have a good idea and I trust on him. Confidence because Decathlon receive my phone, and even if we are a very, very small company, and we call a so big company like Decathlon, 7 billion euro each year of factory. So they told me, okay, I can help you. It's not a problem. And I can give you all the file without any NDA or agreement, or you have not to see nothing. And confidence because the hospital, even if they was in danger because they have a lot of COVID patients and they work so much, they found the time to help me and to try if my project was good. The second point is to ask, because I try to ask all the people to help me, and no one said no. I ask my 5 engineers to help me, even if they have to stay at home. They come back home and come here in the office and start helping me. The hospital, I ask the hospital to help me, and they say yes. I ask Decathlon to help me, and they say yes. I ask 16,000 makers to switch on their 3D printer and print an object that they have never seen and that they doesn't know if it works or not, but they have done. So sometimes we will be surprised that if you ask, we will receive more yes than you imagine. The third word is get started. So at the beginning, we start without knowing that we all over the world need our ideas. We start thinking that only 80 pieces of them were in need. So we start like a joke. But at the end, the project became bigger and bigger every day. And the fourth lesson is think open. Just not imagine that all the people want to copy you, all the people want to stole your money, stole your idea. If you have a good idea, your idea will become bigger and bigger. And if you try to open your idea, a lot of people will help you to grow your idea. So this is all for me.
Thanks, Christian. Yeah, thanks again. That was super interesting. It's finally nice to put a face to that mask, because I've seen that, and yeah, it's quite inspiring in terms of the way you managed to bring everybody together in that way and get everybody to produce things socially across so many different borders. So thanks again. We'll come back to Christian towards the end of this session with some questions, but I just want to go back and reintroduce Nick, because obviously we had Nick at the beginning and we had a few technical problems. So for the people that have just joined in the meantime, let me briefly introduce Nick again. So Nick is Nick Stanhope. He's the founder of Shift, a UK non-profit organisation that brings together design thinking and collective ways of working to help tackle inequalities. Hello again, Nick. Apologies for the slight technical hiccup at the beginning. But yeah, if I hand over to you, your talk is going to be about the collective future of social design. Please take it over. And just one quick note for the audience. Please, if you have any questions for Nick or Christian, please use the chat bar on the side of the platform, and we'll get those to them at the end of this talk. So with that in mind, over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, and nice to follow such a fascinating talk from Christian. I think I got into my introduction, so for those of you who were there for that, I won't go through it all again. What I will do is just contextualize the story I'm about to share. So having worked as a designer, working on complex systemic social and environmental problems, we've loved and followed design thinking and practice, and feel like it's added enormous value to our work to try and understand and overcome some of those challenges, and also feel like this has been a period of our history as designers when design has never been more important, when the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the context and landscape in which most services and support for communities across Europe, across the world operate, and the need for kind of urgent reimagination and redesign of all of these services has been critical. So never has there been a more important time for design to be at its best. And what we have been exploring, what we've been questioning of ourselves in our own work, is what are some of the potential tendencies within that design process which are progressive, and what of those are potentially regressive. So this story I wanted to share from our design work, from our experience of applying design thinking practice against these social and environmental ambitions. Starts with a boy who we met in a chicken shop in South Birmingham every afternoon for a couple of weeks a few years ago. This boy would come into that chicken shop every day with his two brothers and his mum. And they would order loads and loads of kind of chicken and chicken burgers and deep fried chicken and chips and Coke. We were there to try and understand a bit more about how and why they did this, as designers do in the first stage of their design work. And our intentions were to try and better understand the relationship between poor diets and particularly unhealthy takeaway food and problems such as child obesity and type 2 diabetes. What the COVID-19 crisis has revealed even more so is problems such as obesity massively increase kind of risk and vulnerability to viruses such as COVID, and have generally been having a bigger and bigger and worse impact on our public health in the UK and internationally for some time. Now around 30% of 11-year-olds in the UK are obese. The cost to the NHS is estimated at over 6 billion, and hospital admissions due to obesity are going up all the time. So we wanted to better understand these behaviors, these decisions, this environment, and we use that design thinking and process in order to do that. And there would be a natural instinct from the kind of starting point of public health to be quite judgmental of this mother in this situation, bringing this boy into this environment almost every day and ordering all these chicken and chips, and that public health agenda would suggest that mother didn't have, would lack information about diet and about health and about nutrition, lacked skills about cooking and shopping, lacked motivation, and was perhaps a poor parent. But the beauty of the design process is its compassion and empathy, and its ability through ethnography to see that within this mother's world, within her daily life, this was a very rational and logical decision. She had two jobs to get these three boys picked up from school, and about 45 minutes in between these jobs to get these boys picked up from school, fed, and dropped off. And so she'd get to her work. Two of the boys had quite significant behavioural and emotional problems. So they were fussy eaters. She had really valued low stress, peaceful kind of situations. She had very little support. She had two partners, none of whom were providing with her any sort of support. One of whom had been abusive. She was threatened with eviction. She was in very low paid work. She had her own mental health problems. Within that context, this decision to have half an hour of her boys being well fed and happy and peaceful for about £7 was precious and valuable, and that process really demonstrated, the power of storytelling within that design process. And so the insights from that process were that either we had to design to fit into that very, very narrow set of constraints, that very narrow bandwidth, to provide options, alternatives that were healthier but were equally tasty and cheap and accessible, or work to expand that bandwidth and improve access to better employment, improve living wage, improve transport and housing locally. So we pushed some insights into some of our other teams working on those, and this food team worked on trying to bring new fast food services to market. Again, the beauty of that design process to operate in a complex marketplace, very dysfunctional. We worked through many cycles of design and testing. We got parents involved in creating prototypes and taking them to market very quickly and testing them. Worked through dozens of cycles of design and ended up taking 3 brands to market last year. Box Chicken, which is now kind of serving healthy, affordable, but very popular jerk chicken meals, and then 2 other brands, Mama Lay's, providing kind of food that kind of evokes home cooked meals, and a Peso Burrito brand, all bringing more healthy food to market, all trying to disrupt the kind of domination of very unhealthy food within the kind of communities where this mother lived. And this was a nice, compassionate, empathetic, creative example of the design process, and one that we've worked through as designers dozens of times, and over the last 6 months has really accelerated. We've been incredibly busy trying to use this kind of design thinking and process to respond to the crisis. But a process like this, this is the double diamond process. A lot of you will be aware of the kind of process which we follow. We have to allow for the fact that, yes, this can generate good, useful, healthy products and services in these kind of situations. It can contribute to kind of a better landscape of products and services, but there are also some tendencies at work within this process which we've become more aware of and more concerned by. And over the last 6 months, as the inequalities within our systems have become even more apparent, the experience of COVID-19, and obviously the kind of light shone on racial inequalities and injustices by the Black Lives Matter movement, these questions have become even more prominent for us when we all need design to be at its very best. So 2 tendencies that I'd like to talk more about. One is a question really: is this process inherently too independent and individualistic? Is one thing I'd like to explore. Does it overemphasize the role and value of individual designers and design teams? Does it overemphasize individual users? Is it overly competitive to thrive in the kind of complex, very broken systems often we're working in? And the second is design naturally extractive and does it have inegalitarian tendencies? This is something that we've become more aware of over the last 6 months. And so to unpack both of these a little bit more, this first question of whether it's too independent or individualistic, ultimately a design team represents a precious resource within the overall effort to prevent and reduce social and environmental problems, and to understand and make progress against social inequalities and injustices. And the ideal is that this resource, these designers, these design teams, these processes add the greatest value to the overall progress. But we feel like that the tendencies tend to work often in other directions. Within the design process, there's often very little of the mindset or processes that acknowledge the dozens and dozens of other teams that have worked on and are working on those same questions, working through similar processes. Perhaps the process seeks glory too readily. It overemphasizes perhaps new solutions. It loves innovation. That's where the kind of sexiness of design often is. And I'm targeting the end user. That's where we always, this process often leads us to. Whereas is that really inviting us, helping us play the best possible role within these kind of collective efforts and complex systems? And then thirdly, it can often over-individualize users. The very kind of dominant concept of user-centered design strongly emphasizes, perhaps dictates, that the single user sits at the heart of the process and regards a kind of impact as the aggregation of the benefits for users, rather than emphasizing relationships, for example, between users and within communities. So just to unpick this a little bit more, some of the questions and related to that first one, that independent individualistic tendency within design that we need to be able to answer to be effective, but design doesn't necessarily help us answer. Questions like, when we frame a problem, when we pick a problem like the one that we picked as a team, what other interpretations and priorities should be aware of? There are probably dozens or hundreds of others approaching this problem. Design can lead us into a kind of self-importance around the problem that we have selected, or those commissioning or funding our work have selected. The discovery work again leads you into talking directly with groups of users and relishing that process as we did. But what has been learned before about these experiences, these lives, these priorities, these systems, who else is learning this now? That's not inherent or not that common within design processes. When you're defining an opportunity for design, when you're defining needs, have we defined the same ones as others? Are we all working on the same user needs? The answer we find is very often yes, when we're aware of what multiple design teams are working through. As you're working through those kind of creative, generative development process, the question, what value to the wider system are we playing? What role are we playing? What value are we proving? And then finally, does our solution add overall value? The design process doesn't necessarily help you answer that, despite the fact it's really the only thing that matters. So those questions about what role a design process is playing within an enormously kind of often populated area, such as child obesity or youth mental health, or within the response to kind of COVID, it doesn't necessarily inherently equip you well to understand what role you're playing. With that, around this question of whether the process is inherently extractive or inegalitarian, we often feel like the design process reflects and compounds inequalities. I'm very aware, speaking of a white male middle-class designer living in a wealthy city in a wealthy country, of talking about extractive processes as a well-paid designer working on social problems, but it's in the glare of inequality and injustice that has been so brought home so sharply. We have to ask these questions. We have to ask questions about ourselves and our role that we're playing within these systems, and it needs to be acknowledged as we understand what values and mindsets we should bring in design. So to unpack this one a little bit more, what questions related to this inequality and this question of extraction are uncomfortable about the design process? First of all, whose problem was the one that we identified? Was it ours? Was it what we understood? Was it the commissioners or funders who put resource into our work? Was that the same version of a problem that those people and communities that we're supposed to be working for, would they have prioritized that? Who's getting the benefits of that discovery process I talked about? The storytelling, the ethnography, the photography by a wonderful photographer called Finn Taylor. All great stuff and beautiful stories, but who was being paid for that work? Who was gathering experience? Who was gathering understanding from that work? Who knew more at the end of it? It was the researchers and the designers, not the mum and the kids that we spent time with. Does the definition of a problem, does it acknowledge structural inequalities and injustices sufficiently? Often not. And then, more broadly through these design processes, who's accumulating the data and IP and assets of what's been created? Again, we tried to overcome all of these things. And on that last one, we try and find kind of open or kind of collective methods of ownership. But very often, you're naturally drawn into a kind of accumulation of assets for that design team and for the partners working on it. So why are these questions so important? I believe that these questions, these tendencies, these can significantly restrict the ability of design to contribute to really transformational progress. And that now at this time, that feels more important than ever. Through these tendencies, they often reflect and compound existing inequalities and injustices. They often kind of reinforce the primacy of the individual needs and values, perhaps over relationships and community needs and values. This eases into optimizing the system through a series of independent, modest tweaks, perhaps, rather than having the capacity to transform those systems. So the one question is, where does, are these inherent values and characteristics of the design? Is this inevitable? Has design spent has been born out of highly commercial environments where competition is essential, where you're trying to build IP and assets within a company, within a venture, and ownership of those things is central, where externalities of that design are normally someone else's problem, whether they're environmental or social, and where, in a commercial setting, increased inequalities isn't necessarily a problem. In fact, it might be a wonderful opportunity to design a new kind of £1,000 bit of furniture. So, or do these tendencies just reflect the fact that design is, whether it's socially minded, environmentally minded, or commercially minded, is taking place within kind of cultures and systems where individualism is a dominant principle, where the private benefit is normally valued over the communal, and where there are deep-seated kind of inequalities and injustices. So despite all of these questions, we do feel hopeful and optimistic about the role of design. I do believe that the best of design and the kind of mindset and processes that I talked through, that were able to unveil a different picture of people's lives very compassionately, empathetically, and develop creative solutions, can be brought together with a more collective spirit, set of values and principles. And absolutely there can be more contribution from design thinking processes. We're at the heart, or part of, an effort to try and build design thinking practice across the government and social sectors in the UK, and we have to be sure that we're doing that through this collective lens. And so finally, I wanted to just tell you a little bit more about what we mean by collective design. It's by no means, it's not capitalized, it's not an ownable idea. It is many people working on a multitude of different design practices and fields would kind of fall under this broad bucket of what we mean by collective design. But ultimately, what we're describing is a more shared and interdependent design activities that intend to provide the greatest possible collective benefits. They are highly aware and connected to and interdependent with like-minded efforts. They are highly aware of inequalities and injustices within the communities and systems in which they operate, and they're trying to drive benefits for every participant, for everyone it touches as it progresses and through its outputs. Some of the principles of collective design and some examples of those. First of all, of course, is humility. Some of the individualistic tendencies I described are kind of, ego-driven or overconfident. Perhaps we can use design. And we can develop solutions. It's quite perhaps a slightly Silicon Valley-based solutionist kind of instinct in there. But with humility, we can see and ask questions about the role that we should be playing, the value that we can add. Attached to that, of course, is openness within the design process, and more than just openness of the outputs. You're a lot of people talking about making data and insights open, great, but actually let's be open with our intentions. Let's allow people in who will share those intentions to work in a kind of connected and collaborative way. Collegiate and relational, there is very little place for kind of competition. There is some place for competition within the kind of context in which I'm describing, within socially minded design, within kind of activist inspired design, activism inspired design. But ultimately, that more collegiate and relational approach, which is defined by relationships with others and more relational intent and practice to kind of balance that dominance of user-centered design. We have a project, a Shift, the organization I run, called the Relationships Project, which is trying to build a field of relationship-centered practice, relationship-centered design towards that goal. Fourthly, this question of interdependence. Interdependence with each other, between what we create, with our community, with our environment. There's someone we work with called Indy Johar, who runs an organization called Dark Matter Labs, who talks very articulately and beautifully about the idea that interdependence is always there, but we often ignore it in favor of less relational, less connected, and more competitive instincts. But the connection between our work and others, the connection between our work and the environment and our ecosystem, and the connection between what we create is always there. Often, inevitably compounding some of the inequalities and problems that we're supposed to be working on. Fifth, this idea that every ounce of a design process should be taking into account inequalities and injustices within our own role, in the role of the people of communities that we claim to work on behalf of. This last year has shown more than ever how cognizant we need to be of those. A colleague of mine, Teo Medjupin, talks very, very clearly and passionately about how our inherent values and ethics flow naturally and inevitably into a design process. And so unless you're cognizant of them, they are going to only kind of reflect and accelerate the kind of assumptions and biases and perhaps kind of unknown kind of racism that you bring into that design process. So hyper awareness of these. And then this question of shared value and ownership. There's an organization in the UK called Lankelly Chase, a funder, and they've been trying very hard to engage from the moment a design intention or a research intention emerges, from that moment to engage and work with and consider, and more than consider, to build the intent of that work around what the priorities and voice of the people and communities that process is designed to support. And then finally, a few of the resources and assets required for collective design. Some of the things that are often missing because, design is too often pursued by a series of individual designers and teams working away at their bit of the problem. A lot of these resources and assets are undervalued and underinvested in. So some examples of those: strong networks and fields. I have to say, I don't feel, and I'm interested in, hearing from someone like Christian as to whether he felt part of a strong network of field of those who were trying to understand and respond to problems over the last 6 months with, PPE and equipment. I don't feel a strong part of networks and fields in the issues I'm working on, despite the fact that there is almost no incentive to kind of independence and no reason to undermine cooperation. Secondly, this question of shared intelligence. We sought to build our own understanding of that boy's life that I talked through, and our own understanding of what was going on. I mean, in many ways, that you shouldn't need to do that. Again, these are shared problems, shared ambitions. The understanding of them should be open and evolving, and many should be able to contribute and benefit from them. We don't have to take what is normal in a commercial environment where you have to keep that intelligence within an organization, within a venture. We can build and evolve and develop it much more collectively. In the UK, Nesta has been developing some really interesting collective intelligence methods and approaches, and has been kind of innovating in that area. And there's plenty going on, but it's needs a lot more time and investment. Thirdly, this idea of open pipelines. People talk a lot about open data and creating things open source. Of course, that's a huge contributor to this collective progress, but we need to be more open with our intentions, with what we're planning to do next, because the thousands of individuals and teams and organizations who are all working on these problems need to be able to see what they're intending so they can align and integrate and improve those efforts. Those efforts should be the greater than the sum of their parts, and it feels at the moment, because of that lack of mutual awareness, they're often less. Fourth, shared platforms. Something like the Smart Cities Amsterdam platform shows the power of creating a shared space for multiple designers and innovators who are all trying to work on the same questions and problems, creating those connections, creating some of those shared forms of understanding. And then finally, collective financial instruments and collective ownership structures. A lot of the funding and commissioning and investment that comes into a design process like the one we described often restricts some of the things I'm talking about. It kind of incentivizes individual teams working away at an individual outcome and measuring that outcome, improving it. And the ownership of some of the outputs of it, again, tend to reinforce some of those more independently minded work. We are working away at this. We are trying to, every time we embark on any bit of a design process, We're trying to understand exactly what the best role that we can play is within alongside others. We're trying to think hard about these questions of inequality and justice as we embark on this design. And now, this event demonstrates the power of design in the face of really significant and worsening, in many countries, social and environmental problems. If these collective values and principles and ideas are compelling, then I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. That was really, really good. Super inspiring again. I think we have Christian available as well. Is that correct? So it should be Christian, Nick, and myself.
Yes, yeah.
Perfect. So I've just got a few questions that I'd like to run through. We've got some from the audience. I've got some from myself as well, if I'm honest. I want to start with one that maybe you two can debate yourself as well. We talked about the double diamond, the in-depth. It takes a bit of time to run through that process versus Christian's approach, which was very much agile development, trial and error, quick turnaround. I'm just curious, how do you both feel about those two approaches, and is there a right time for one and a right time for the other? Who'd like to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think it's a really interesting one. We actually, when I say we are, in many contexts, but we've often been we've been guilty of perhaps even within contexts which aren't led by an emergency, spending too much time and during a research process. And that's not to say those insights aren't valuable, but what we find over and over again is working in with very complex and often dysfunctional contexts. You can only really learn properly when you're in there trying to make something work. And so we've actually tended to really shorten those initial, at the time that we spend outside of actually trying to make something work. And anything we do around kind of, ethnography and user research and desk research now tends to work alongside that more practical work. So I was inspired by Christian's example, and I think outside of an emergency, it's tempting to think you have a lot of time and a lot of lead-in time to spend doing a lot of that research. It's important, but it can be done, I think, alongside or within much more proactive kind of real-world testing.
Yep.
Yeah. Obviously, we are a research center, so we are used to create a new project, and we are used to try to speak with innovation. But usually, it's the first time we create a product or a project in only in hour. So in 2 hours for the Venturi valve, or 8 hours for the Charlotte valve. We are not used to work so fast. But we found that even if it was our first time that we spoke with valve, with hospital or medical equipment, the product works. So sometimes it's not the right solution to spend months or years creating the same product, but it's better to test on the market, to test on the market, to understand if it works or not. And after that, perfect it and create a better product. So from this to this one.
Perfect. And just moving on from that slightly, do you think, this, devil's advocate a little bit here, do you think we need a real crisis like the one we're going through for people to innovate en masse the way that you've described?
Yeah, obviously, I go, Nick. Okay, obviously, if you are in a good zone and everything goes well, you are not so pushy to create innovation. And so sometimes a crisis can help you to innovate because you have to try to do your best to become a star.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think at these moments, you can always see good things and perhaps more regressive things within the response. I think you're suggesting that within the urgency of the response required, and if you look at the vaccine process that we've worked through, it's extraordinary, and certainly the response of public and social sector services in the UK, and I'm sure more widely, the kind of rapidity and intensity that with the kind of redesign process was really inspiring, and the kind of emergence of kind of a huge amount of essentially quickly hacked together community and mutual solutions within communities was incredible. I think on the other side, I guess, is your point of whether it's needed. If it is, then it's a shame and it's sad. I mean, there are massive global health problems like tuberculosis that have still not had anything like in terms of actual effect on global health and mortality, similar scale, but have had nothing like the investment in intensity. Before the crisis, there were a whole load of, we've had 10 years of quite dramatic cuts. Child poverty's increased, inequality's increased. And one example from our work, the number of families who were kind of being evicted was increasing very rapidly year on year. The response to that was very slow and unnecessarily slow. And our response to emerging environmental crises over the last decade have also been very slow. So I guess the question is how does it take an emergency which affects wealthy countries directly to unlock an immediate response? Yes. Are there equally dramatic, urgent crises around the world that get very little response at all? Also, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because you mentioned, Nick, the networks and fields towards the end in the principles. You mentioned the networks and fields, and it's kind of where I was leading to, essentially. If it is the sake of, if we are having to do this just because of a crisis, then I'm curious to get both of your opinions on how can we, in normal times, work to create those networks and fields in a similar fashion in terms of intensity, but without the crisis behind us driving it.
I'll try a quick one. I think that you're absolutely right. I think that if we emerge from this, will we regress into like kind of less collaborative behaviors? I guess one hope is that more relationships have been formed amongst those working on particular problems and challenges, and they will hopefully stick. Once an relationship's been invested in within a particular field or network. One would be, I think, probably the power and potential of more collaborative, connected ways of working has been revealed. In the UK, there's a huge effort from trusts and foundations. They've created something called the Funders Collaborative Hub and multiple collaborations of other trusts and foundations, which will stick, I think. And then whether they can be formed, I think there is a values and priorities question, which is, in normal times, how much do we value the power of working, together and interdependently, and how much do we value the rewards of kind of, waving our solution and how much people appreciate that solution. So yes, I think a lot can be gained and accelerated from this around that connected working, and then some bigger questions, I guess, about the values we all exhibit afterwards.
Yeah. We are a small company. We are only 14 people, but I think that it doesn't matter how many people, how many employees do you have in your company, or how big is the money that you can earn from your company. We are a small company, but and the doctor that had the idea was an individual person. So very small company that can contact and can work together with a multinational. So like Decathlon, and also like other companies that now are started working with us. So we can work together. It's not a problem.
Excellent. Christian, just a quick question from the audience again. Could you remind people, I think maybe they didn't quite catch it, what was the name of the product, the face mask? Did it have a name, the project?
Yeah, the name is EasyMask 19. And the name of the valve is Charlotte Valve. That is the name of my wife. Only because during my first project, I spent all my time in office, Sunday, Saturday, and or in hospital, so I cannot back home. And she was very afraid for me. So it's a present for her to call the valve with her name.
Nice, very nice. So I've just got a few more questions from the audience for both of you. For Nick first, how do you see the role of designers when you suggest all these issues on our design process? What is their responsibility, and can you allocate that in the double diamond somewhere?
So that's about what the responsibility is of designers. Sorry.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think that I think it's interesting. I mean, I guess to take that question from a couple of perspectives. One is, what's the responsibility of all designers? So regardless of the context in which you're working, your intentions, whether it's commercial or non-commercial. I think it is. I mean, I love the idea of get-togethers like this, bringing together designers from all sorts of industries and sectors around activism to say, how can we all be exhibiting more of these shared values and intentions? How can we all be taking into account inequality and racial injustice and socioeconomic kind of gaps? How could we all be contributing to shared knowledge and understanding to kind of fields and networks? Specifically for those who are working within on particular health or environmental or social or educational challenges, and perhaps more the purpose is more specifically around social progress. Well, the nature of that responsibility for me is that the something like the double diamond process, or a conventional design process, it's to be really cognizant of the kind of values and intentions and assumptions that you're bringing into any tool that you use. I think probably we see a lot of people just kind of pick it up and follow it because it's a great way of learning and iterating and everything, but to see that as just one contribution amongst many, to see that as something to which you're bringing your own intentions and values, and be really responsible for those and for how you treat people and interact with people and reward people through that process. So I think that question's right. The responsibility is amongst the designers. They're also going to be inheriting quite a lot of obligations or expectations from where the money's coming from to fund their work. So getting that relationship right, questioning power imbalances within that, and other forms of kind of inegalitarian kind of values. But yeah, I think a strong sense of shared responsibility amongst designers is a really powerful thing.
Yep, couldn't agree more. A question for Christian. You talked a lot about your team partnering with other individuals, stakeholders, teams, etc. I think there's probably a lot of designers out there who have similar experiences where they're looking to partner with stakeholders and work closely with other teams, but maybe it's not as successful, especially in your situation where it was so successful so quickly. Do you have any sort of key principles that people can stick to in this kind of situation, in such a quick turnaround, agile type project where you're working so successfully with other stakeholders, other partners?
Yeah, I'll give you some suggestions. I think that there is not a rule, a formula for the success. When I start helping the hospital, I doesn't know what happened the day after or the day after again. So I start helping only because I thought with my heart that I have to help someone, and I love to be I can help a person, even for COVID, for example, even if I'm not a doctor, because I'm an engineer, but I can help you that you have another kind of problem. So I start only thinking that, and all what happened after, it's a present. It's something that I doesn't want at the beginning. It arrives and okay, but it's fantastic, obviously. Also because, for example, the president of Italy give me an honor and a prize for what I have done, but it doesn't work and doesn't help with that particular goal. My goal was only to help people, and obviously, I'm now so happy for everything and all the project how is done.
Excellent. One more question for Nick. So we're indeed very competitive towards each other as designers, and we find ourselves in a system that makes policies to encourage these habits. Do you think the underlying problems inhibit us from truly changing?
That's a cracking question. Yes, I definitely agree. There are some really within the what we feel rewarded by, what rewards fund, where the money flows. And particularly on that financial question, I talked a little bit about how we all tend to gravitate design. We often gravitate towards new solutions that are directly, for users, when actually the need for multiple other contributions, whether it's into kind of shared platforms, shared intelligence, shared infrastructure and assets, the kind of network weavers and connectors, all of those roles are kind of underappreciated or underpopulated. And one reason for that is because they're very difficult to get resources for. They're very difficult to get funding for. The funding and commissioning follows. We as designers will innovate a solution to solve this problem for these people. We can measure the outcomes, we can prove the value. And the way in which measurement and evaluation works as well follows that same pattern. If you can say this number of people have used this to have this outcome. So yes, there are a lot of barriers. And I think as well as that financial context, there's obviously some human things in there. I think the hope I would have is that actually, I don't know how others feel, but I often feel the job of being a designer within these kind of really sticky, often heartbreaking problems and challenges is quite lonely, unnecessarily lonely. And I think when people do make those connections, they feel like they're contributing to something bigger, connecting with others. That's hugely rewarding in perhaps more powerful ways than just being able to say, I did this, this is my thing that solved this problem. So I think probably, where we can make progress is by continuing to demonstrate that when we kind of connect and collaborate and reinforce each other, when we're collegiate, with some healthy doses of competition within that, but that is incredibly rewarding kind of thing to be part of. And when we see movements evolve, they often all of those other competitive instincts can often drift away a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And following on from that, there's a follow-up question for both of you.
Oh.
Sorry. Oh, yep.
No, yes, sorry. So one knock at my door.
Yeah, no problem. So, the question is, how do you think designers working in a collaborative environment can protect the credit of the original ideas without being completely plagiarized or stolen?
Yeah. We spoke every day with inventors or with other people. Obviously, we suggest them to make a patent, if possible, of their idea. But you have to imagine that all the people have a work, and all the people try to do their work at best. If you come to me and you told me your idea, and I have another idea, probably the day after, I will work at my idea, not yours. So even if you speak about your idea, you have not imagined that tomorrow, the day after, I will store your idea or I will work on your idea. Sometimes I have to spend 3-4 days to speak with inventors before to understand what is their idea or what we want to do, because they are very afraid that someone can steal their idea. But First of all, you are not to be so afraid, because all the people want to do their work and not yours. And the second, obviously, if you want to protect, you can use there are a different kind of protection. For example, obviously a patent or a design patent.
Yep.
Yes, no, that's right, and it's a great question. And 3 quick reflections. One, I think, is that in the world in which I'm working most of the time, there's a kind of inherited assumption that you need to protect stuff, but actually that doesn't translate into any value particularly. It would be much more effective if it was much more open and lightly held, because there aren't those financial benefits of kind of locking up IP and assets and things like that. A second thought is that there's this concept that I like. Stephen Johnson describes it in his book, Where Good Ideas Come From, about this idea that actually we overemphasize the individual innovation, or the kind of innovation of a particular team or individual, but actually, that is drawing from a kind of collective intelligence, or often in kind of implicit collective intelligence. He calls it the adjacent possible, and one of the reasons why multiple kind of teams of scientists discover the same thing at the same time, because they're all drawing on this kind of shared intelligence. So we might be like, yes, that is mine. It's a bit like the degree to which Silicon Valley products have been built off shared and publicly invested in infrastructure, and then said we deserve every ounce of the value from this, when actually it's come from much wider knowledge and infrastructure. Then thirdly, I think it is important, despite those 2 things, to be acknowledging, and again, it's part of that collegiate spirit, is not looking like you're kind of grabbing on and taking ownership of things, whether they're ideas or concepts or kind of open licensed tools such as the one, or kind of patents such as the ones Christian referring to. I think that is part of the spirit of this, which we should be kind of valuing and respecting and celebrating previous contributions that we're building on.
Perfect. And on that note, I think that's a good time to thank you both for your contributions and your talks. I think the audience will agree these have been super interesting, super insightful. So yeah, I just want to say thank you again to both Christian and Nick. And if you've got any last comments.
No, well, great to be involved. Thank you for having us. Perfect.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you. Thanks for joining us. So for the audience, what's going to happen now is we're going to take a short break, and then at 4:45 we have the following 2 talks. The first is Designing for Good by Actively Empowering Everyone with Carl Emil Henson, and then the second one is Becoming Relentless Change Agents with Dr. Leslie Ann Noel. So do join us again at 4:45, and I'll see you all there. Hi, and welcome back to the second part of today's sessions here at the Barcelona Design Week Summit in Barcelona. We're going to kick things straight off with the next two talks. And our first speaker is Carl Emil Jensen, and he is the head of creative at Too Good To Go. Hi, Carl. So, Carl, I understand that you oversee and lead the global creative department on its mission to combat food waste globally.
That is correct.
Perfect. And your talk today is Designing for Good by Actively Empowering Everyone, where I believe you're going to focus on how Too Good To Go's business model has changed over time. It's changed its direction, while digging deeper into how to grow a successful community-based service with a focus on food, people, and planet.
Yes.
Perfect. In that case, I'll hand over to you, and I'll join you again later on with some questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. So, does that mean that my screen is now visible?
1 second, we're just getting that. Yes, perfect.
Perfect, great. All right, so yes, my name is Carl Emil, and I work for Too Good To Go. And what I want to talk through today is how we're trying to design for good in order to build a food waste movement. But first, to kick it off, I want to just share briefly a bit about my journey. So I reside in Copenhagen, and I've lived in Copenhagen my entire life. And I graduated off of Copenhagen School of Design and Technology. And right after I graduated, I founded my own company. And the idea behind this company was really to gather different artists from around the world. So whether that was 3D modelers or photographers or painters, we wanted to give these artists, these talents, a window to expose what they were capable of doing. And really, it was also from me knowing a bit about the industry and seeing sometimes how different talents weren't exposed correctly, and also how they sometimes weren't paid fairly in terms of commission and everything around that. After that venture, I was fortunate enough to join Under Armour, where I specifically worked on an application called Endomondo. So Endomondo is a fitness tracker app where you can log your distance when you've been out running and track how many calories you've burned, etc. Endomondo was acquired by Under Armour, and it was during this time that I met Mette Lykke. And Mette Lykke is now the current CEO of Too Good To Go. So I joined Too Good To Go, and I was really, firstly, I was originally there to improve the application and the specific service that we have. But as time grew on, the role sort of grew as well. So I started as the sole designer in the team, and now it's developed into overseeing all the creative parts. But before I talk about Too Good To Go specifically, I want to deep dive a bit into the food waste issue. And 1/3 of all food in the world right now is actually wasted. So that means that somewhere along the chain from farm to fork, the food is either lost or wasted before it makes it into the bellies. Also, that means that 51 tons of food is wasted every second. And that obviously has a lot of consequences as well. So we can take a look at the environmental consequences, where food waste stands for 8% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And that's not food, that's actually food wasted. And then we can also take a look at the social aspect, where 870 million people of the world still go to bed hungry every day, just adding to the absurdity of the problem as well. So it's not that we don't know how to produce the food, it's just that we don't really know how to distribute it properly. And then, of course, we have the whole financial aspect, where our wasted food has a worth of $1.2 trillion US. So also a massive amount. But really the way that I see it is that the wasted food itself is not only the problem, there is also all the different wasted resources that goes into producing the food. So here, if we take a look across the supply chain, whenever we waste food, we essentially also waste land, because it takes land to produce food and to have the agriculture, etc. And just to give an idea about that, we're right now using an area the size of China just to grow food that is eventually wasted. And then we can also have a think about all the labor and all the hard work that goes into actually producing the food. We have the different resources, such as the fertilizer, the water that it takes to produce the food, and also to clean it along the way. We have the fuel, so it also obviously the food needs to be transported as well. So whether that is with trucks or by sea or by air, and sometimes multiple, just to grow and distribute the food. Then we also have the electricity, the energy that's used to typically refrigerate and cool the food as well. So it's really heartbreaking to think about that all of these resources are essentially wasted whenever we waste the food that we are. And wanted to highlight Project Drawdown, which is not an internal project, but it's an NGO looking at the most substantive solutions against climate change. And they named they named reducing food waste the #1 solution against climate change. And what I also really find interesting about this is that reducing food waste is essentially something that everyone can contribute to in one way or the other. And really what Project Drawdown is looking into is how we can change and stop warming at 2 degrees. So drawdown is referring to the point in time where the emissions stop climbing. And I know we're focused on the sustainable development goals, and it's also something that's mentioned as part of the United Nations targets, specifically 12.3, where by 2030 half per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels and reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. So it's also something that's recognized within sustainable consumption. But it's also a very complex issue as well. So if we take a look at the EU value chain, it's very clear that where Too Good To Go is right now mainly focused at retailers, we can also see that food is lost and wasted at different parts of the chain. And also quite noticeable is that more than half of all the food waste actually happens at home and in the households of the citizens of EU. And I think it's quite interesting because we're often met with the idea that there is nothing really to do about food waste because it's wasted before it actually gets to the grocery stores or gets to the home of people. But it's really a complex issue, and we have food waste wasted all across the chain. So now I want to talk a little bit about Too Good To Go and what we're doing specifically to combat food waste. So I'll talk a little bit about our service right now, how it works, and then I'll highlight some different projects that I think could be worthwhile to mention. So to put it quite simply, Too Good To Go is a social impact company fighting food waste. So we are really looking to drive positive social impact. We are focused solely on food waste. And we are also a company, and I think that's worth mentioning. We are not an NGO, and I'll get a bit more into that later. And to look at some of the Too Good To Go history and how it all started. So it was actually an idea that was first conceived back in 2015 in Denmark. And back then, it was really a small manual web shop where the founders had to go and adjust the numbers of meals saved every day. Then in January 2016, that's when things started picking up a bit because that's also where we launched the application. And I joined sometime around 3.5 years ago. And I've really seen the company also grow from, we were 20, 30 people sitting together in a house, having big ideas and big plans. And now it's really grown into many different countries around Europe. And now we have around 750 employees, or waste warriors, as we like to call ourselves. So I think in many ways, it feels like 2 months and 20 years at the same time. And it's been really quite the journey. And the vision that we've had from the start is we dream of a planet with no food waste. And I remember when I had my first discussions about joining Too Good To Go, I asked about what is our grand vision, what do we want to achieve? And I remember that I was told, well, we want to put ourselves out of a job. And I was like, well, that's a funny answer. But then it quickly dawned on me as well that if we are able to actually eliminate food waste, then there is no Too Good To Go. But at the same time, of course, it's a vision, it's something we work towards, and it will be quite unachievable with this huge issue that we're seeing. And I also want to talk a little bit about the service itself. And I think a big part of why we have received the traction that we have is due to the ingenious nature of the product. So we like to say that it's not a win-win, but it's actually a win-win-win. So right now, whenever our service is used, consumers on one hand are able to get a lot of great food, and they're able to get it at a fraction of its original price. For businesses, they are able to commit themselves in the fight against food waste. They're able to gain some exposure, and they're also able to make some money off of the food that would otherwise have gone to waste. Then on the planet side, obviously the planet is also benefiting from all the food and all the resources that are not wasted along the way as well. And I simply think that this concept and trying, it has more or less stayed the same from the beginning. And I really think that just that in itself is such a rare occasion where you have a service where the more that it's used, the more that is bought, the better it actually is for the planet and for everyone involved. Too Good To Go has been recognized as a B Corp certification, which we're quite happy about. So B Corp's certification means companies that are able to balance profit and purpose and meet some of the highest requirements in terms of sustainable and ethical practices throughout the entire operation, internal and external. And about 3,500 companies are now having this recognition. And just to mention briefly a bit about our partners as well, because we've really also seen that a lot of companies have been willing to also join in on the fight against food waste and really believe in the mission and what we're trying to do as well. So, for instance, we have IKEA and Carrefour and Starbucks, and we're really working with them across different sectors, which is really cool to see. And just to explain how the application that we have is working. So right now, the user is able to browse through our different offerings and see what are the different stores that we have close to them in their area. Then they're able to read a bit more about what they might get in their magic bag. And the magic bag is what you're ordering through Too Good To Go. So the whole idea is that we offer some of the food that's left at the end of the day. And what's left at the end of the day is then put together in this magic bag, which is offered to consumers at a fraction at its original price. So that also means that it's magic in the sense that you really don't know what's going to be in it and what you're ordering. And whenever you have ordered, you can then show up at the store, and it's usually 15, 30 minutes before closing time. And there you can pick up your magic bag, and then you're part of fighting food waste. So that's the whole concept of the application in a nutshell. And I would really like also to show a small video. So there is a project called Solar Impulse that accredits 1,000 efficient solutions against climate change and have highlighted green solutions with a clear and scalable business case. And I think this will also help visualize a little bit the concept and how it works specifically. So can we play the video? Thanks a lot. So I hope that summarizes everything that we're trying to do. And also here, just to really explain and emphasize why it's also important. I mean, that means that whenever there's a meal saved. That means that we're also saving the world's resources. And then that means that we're saving some of the potential CO2 emissions from going into the atmosphere. And for us, I mean, the grand dream is really also that all food produced in the world is also consumed. And I think it's quite logical in the sense that the food is produced to be consumed. So that's really what we work towards. We collaborated with Wageningen University, which is based in the Netherlands, and we tried to look into what are the factors that actually make people buy the different magic bags. And for the most part, we learned that people really want to be able to reduce food waste. Then around a quarter of everyone said it was due to the surprise effect of the magic bag. And that was also really quite interesting for us, in the way that in the beginning, I remember we had talks about if the magic bag that we're offering was the right thing to do. Because, you know, these days we're so used to having tailor-made solutions and everything is really about convenience. And with our service, you actually have to get out and get up to a store. And whenever you get to the store, you don't know the food that you will have, because it's left whatever is left at the end of the day. But actually, we found that that's something that people enjoy. And whenever they reserve a meal, then they look forward to what will actually be in my magic bag at the end of the day, and really be creative about like how to use the leftovers, etc. For 20%, it's about saving money. And for 17% is to be part of the food waste movement. And whatever the reason is, it's all really good. For us, it just means that we have more people fighting food waste. And the whole thing about being part of the food waste movement is also something that we're quite happy about, because we're essentially trying to build a movement and to go beyond just the service itself. But I will talk more about that in just a bit. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how it has been to see the company grow, and how we've really gone about the different development. And I would say that we've always had this rapid prototyping. We've always been working with MVPs and constantly trying out different things, and then really going and learning from it essentially as we go on. So you can see that our logo is the one that is to the right here. And really it works much better for us as a logo, partly due to the fact that the logo that we had before, it was quite detailed and there was a lot of different elements and text on it. And we're an application, so we also need to think about the app icon, where people couldn't essentially read and see properly what we were about. But at the same time, it was the leaf that you see on the old logo that really also inspired where we are today. The same thing with the color. And I think that is a metaphor of everything that we've done, that we've been moving a lot and been doing a lot of things. And then we've learned from that as well and taken that into account. So leading up to today, where we are now the world's largest B2C marketplace for surplus food, we're live in 14 countries around Europe, and we're just starting to take on New York and Boston as well, where 40% of all the food produced is wasted right now. We recently reached the mark of saving 50 million meals, and we have 27 million users and 56 partners who are active with us and fight food waste every day. So it's really something that in a very short time have been able to see a lot of traction. And now I want to talk a bit about designing for good, some different projects and things that we're actually doing to try to design for good. And we now have this, which is something that I dreamed about ever since the beginning. We have proper design guidelines in place. We have a proper brand book that talks about the values and the direction that we're going in etc. And I will say to anyone who are building these guidelines and working with them, you really also design or make up what you want to be part of it as well. So for instance, in our case, we chose to also have a sustainability guide on there, just to exemplify internally what are some of the different things that we can do to be more sustainable and to do more good. And another example is that we have a guide on the different materials that we use. So for instance, we have, in a lot of cases, we use recycled paper, something that's actively, where there's produce actively taken from the landfills. So avocado shells and nuts, etc. And then that's crushed into the paper. And then we actually use food waste to use that as our paper as well. And I was also asked to share some of the different learnings and how we've been able to go about things. And one of the key ideas and key themes that I think is really evident at Too Good To Go is don't be afraid to look foolish in order to progress. And I think as designers and as creatives in general, I think we really a lot of times pursue perfection and try to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect insight, etc. And I think, of course, it's good to pursue perfection. And I think it's also good to use the right insights, etc. But what we've also learned is we've been going and been testing out so many different things. And even with the things that work less well, they've actually been able to take us to the next step and to the next level. Again, to exemplify here, we used to use a lot of drawing and a lot of cartoon characters, which wasn't right for us in any way. But that was only because of that we were able to build this new way of communicating, exemplified by the pineapple. So that's really a thing that I want to say to everyone, that don't be afraid to try things and go out and don't wait for things to be perfectly perfect before you do it. So this is a really big part of what Too Good To Go is all about. So we have the vision, as I mentioned. We have a mission, which is about inspire and empower everyone to fight food waste together. So not only do we want to inspire people, but we actually also want to give people the tools where they can concretely go and fight food waste. The service that I talked about and the application is what we refer to as the marketplace. So that is where we have the most direct impact and where people can fight food waste every day. But we also realize that food waste is a very complex issue with many different dimensions, which means that we're also going across households, businesses, schools, and public affairs to try and fight food waste. And we have people actively focused on each of the different pillars. As an example, trying to build educational material for schools, or trying to share ways that you can limit food waste in the household, etc. And all the funds that we gain through the direct impact are essentially also used to invest in these more indirect ways of fighting food waste. So that also means that we are able to take everything to another level than only just being about everything that's in the application. Because if we really want to be serious about fighting food waste, then the problem is also much bigger than just on the households level. And to highlight a few projects, I here present potatoes and date labels. So quite unrelated, but I also thought that highlighting these two different projects would tell something about what we do on different levels. And during COVID and during the curfew, what we saw was that a lot of producers and a lot of farmers were stuck with a lot of food. So in this case, for instance, we had farmers with tons and tons of potatoes that they were not able to distribute anywhere because the different stores and restaurants were closed down. So we talked to a lot of these different producers and tried to talk about what can we do to essentially try and help, because in 6 or 7 weeks the potatoes start to rot, and for all the waste warriors and everything that we're trying to do, that's really heart crushing. So we talked to them and across Europe as well, so in the Netherlands and Belgium and Denmark. And what that really led to was that we created these different potato mountains across Europe. And we then used the application and we used the marketplace to be a way for people to go and pick up potatoes themselves, which then led to 100,000 kilos of potatoes being saved from it. Another part is about date labeling. So this is an ongoing project that we have at Too Good To Go, and really one of our key projects. So there is a lot of confusion about date labels in general, and I can really understand why. Because for the most part, we have two different labels. We have the use by, which you strictly have to follow. It's a food safety indicator, which means that you have to consume or freeze the food before the date. And then on the other hand, we have best before, which is merely a quality indicator. So that is when the producer can guarantee optimal quality and nutritional value, but it doesn't mean that there is any health issues potentially with eating the food after the date. So really, it's all about using your senses the way that it was done before there were any date labels around. So take a look at the food. If it looks good, try and smell the food. If it still smells good, try and taste a little bit of it. If it still tastes good, then it's probably fine to eat as well. And we saw that it was really an issue across different levels as well. For producers, the use of dates are not harmonized. So best before and use by dates are used for similar products. For consumers, the lack of understanding for the different labels in the first place does not help the problem either. And then on retail level, there are different practices, different contracts around what to do with the product. So that then leads to a lot of confusion, and then inevitably that leads to a lot of food waste as well. So what we tried to do was to work together with the different producers and really just add 3 magic words. So whenever we have a best before product, we have literally printed on there often good after. So whenever a consumer sees the product and sees the date, they also have a cue about the product can also be often good after. And then we even put in the whole look, smell, taste test. So to give people an idea of how you're supposed to handle the product that's in your hands. And really, it's something that we've been working on for a long time to really try and change consumer behavior as well in this way, and have worked with Nestle and Unilever and Danone to change some of their date labels. And just briefly, if you're more interested in what's going on across the different pillars, if you want to read into some of the more data, there is something available on our website, specifically something that we call the movement section. And just lastly, I want to talk a bit about connecting food, people, planet. So Too Good To Go is really nothing but a connection between food, people, and planet. So we connect people with food in order to benefit the planet. And having that whole simple idea is something that has helped guide our different initiatives. Does it help the food, the people, the planet? It's something that's reflected in our imagery. And we've also just launched a YouTube channel. So I encourage everyone to go and check it out. But this framework was also what we use as the guiding principles. So we show concrete ways that people can fight food waste with 0 food waste recipes, different tricks and tips as well. Then we have the people part, where we want to show the heroes behind our food. So we really believe that there's been a disconnection between the consumers and where food is, the ones that are working with producing the food and all the love and the care that they put into it. So there we share a lot of inspirational stories of these people who really care and love for producing the food. On the planet side, we try to, in a consumable way, to unfold some of the different consequences that food and food production has on the environment. And really the grand idea is that we believe that the more we respect and value our food, the less we will waste it. And we have a lot of good plans and a lot of good things coming up. So I really encourage you to check for the YouTube channel by Too Good To Go. And just as one last thing, I wanted to summarize some of the key learnings and what I really think has made a big difference in Too Good To Go. So the first thing is really what I talked about trying out a lot of different things and not being afraid of not being perfect. Very much so in the beginning stages as well. We've been met with a lot of challenges and a lot of different things that we essentially didn't know how to handle or what to do with. But we always had the mindset of, we've never done that before. We're sure we can find a way, and we can find a way to do it. Then we have the puzzle piece, which really refers to keeping things simple. So we always try and ask, how can we keep things simple? And then how can we make it even simpler? And I think if you look at our service and how it works, the whole win-win-win, it's really the thing that has changed the least. It's one thing that has always more or less remained the same. And also when you're trying to build a movement and talk to different people across different countries, keeping it simple is simply also key. And then we have lastly, the people, which I think is the biggest factor of all. So everyone who has been willing to go into the fight against food waste with us, and all the passionate people that are behind Too Good To Go as well. All the different producers who really want to join the fight against food waste and do something for good. Everything that we do around design is relating to people in the end. And without the people, there is really no movement. So it's always been very people focused too. And as the last thing, I just want to say thank you very much. And for me, this is really also a call to action. And I really want to encourage everyone to fight food waste together with us. So don't be hesitant to reach out or to say if we can help out in any way or collaborate. So that was it.
Awesome. That was really, really great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Slightly biased, but I have to admit I love the app and the service. It's not only are you doing something great, it's genuinely, and this sounds cliche, it's genuinely delightful in the sense that you're using a service where you get this surprise, and every time it's a surprise. And it's the slide where you had the win-win-win. It just made me think of that again. Yeah, big fan of the app and the service. It's really, really good. So thanks again for sharing that. We'll come back towards the end after the next talk with some questions, and that's just also a reminder to the audience. Please feel free to use the chat section on the side should you have any questions, and we'll get them to the speakers after this next talk. Which, on that note, please let me introduce Dr. Leslie Ann Noel. She is a professor of practice in design thinking and associate director of design thinking for social impact. Hi, Leslie. So your talk is becoming relentless change agents.
Yes.
Excellent.
I'm here to encourage people to embrace change and to promote change.
Perfect. On that note, I'll hand over to you, and we'll join you again after your talk with some questions.
Okay, great. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay, and I'm going to go into presentation mode. All right, so good afternoon in your part of the world. Good morning in my part of the world. It's, what time is it? It's just after, close to 10:30 in the morning, and I'm in New Orleans, in the United States. My name is Dr. Leslie Ann Noel, and I'm a professor of practice at Tulane, and I have a very long title. I'm the Associate Director of Design Thinking for Social Impact of the Phyllis M. Taylor Center for Social Innovation and Design Thinking. So I'm going to encourage you today to become a relentless change agent. I may be speaking with people who already know about change and being change agents. And I'm going to start here with this quote by Eric Liu. If you want to change a story that justifies power and privilege, you must have bold goals and specific steps. One must be in a space where one can ask, what is a better way to do this? And I think if we're talking about change, we have to talk about asking questions and being critical and finding different ways of doing things. So before I start, I'm gonna say just a tiny bit about my world. So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and I spent many years in Brazil, and I'm currently in New Orleans in the United States, and I've lived in a couple of other cities in the United States. And I am a designer. I started off as a product designer and industrial designer, but I've always been interested in activism and social change and social mobility. And really, I've never really been interested, even though I am a product designer, I've never been that interested in design of products for profit. I have always been interested in designing programs, and really I've asked myself questions along the way of how are people impacted. So here's a photograph of some work that I was doing in Uganda, where I designed a program, a very simple program introducing women entrepreneurs to different types of ICT skills. And this is way back in the mid 2000s. I've been connected to way too many universities, but why I'm showing you this is to show you that I am an academic. And so I'm going to share some playful approaches that I use in my academic world. And being an academic gives me a little bit of luxury that I'm creating a project for a different pedagogical reason, than maybe Carl's work that's actually going out into the community. So as I said earlier on, I'm a designer, and this is the process that I learned. Understand, we describe it in different ways, understand, design, test, and then some little arrows to show that we keep going back and forth in the process, and I'm also interested in design mindsets. So these mindsets, as I've started to describe them in the work that I do now, are about being curious, collaborative, creative, questioning, change-oriented, responsive, iterative, empathetic, and to have a think and do kind of mindset where, even though we call what we do design thinking, we're not only thinking, we are doing as we work. So it's design thinking and design doing. And now this is the definition that I was introduced to when I moved to Tulane, where I am now, Tulane University, where I got this definition. Design thinking uses methods from design disciplines, social sciences, development studies, and more to address complex social issues. There isn't just one approach to design thinking, but it's always informed by user and context. And design thinking is a collaborative, human-centered approach to creating innovation and social change. And I embraced these two definitions. And frankly, when I started off as a designer, this wasn't how we worked, or this certainly wasn't how I worked. Even though we knew that we were focusing on people, we often were distracted by making things beautiful, or maybe we were distracted by materials, or, and this real human-centered approach, I certainly think it's a change that we made in design along the way. And I've been learning to do this in the work that I do. So now my title is Design Thinking. I'm Director of Design Thinking for Social Impact. And it has forced me to think, okay, what is social impact? What is social innovation? What is social change? And how do we make these things sticky? Okay. So I had to look up some definitions in the work that I do, because it's a new field. You know, even though I've always been interested in social change, I was working really kind of intuitively. And so now I'm just sharing some of the definitions that I found. So social innovations are new social practices that aim to meet social needs in a better way than the existing solutions, resulting from, for example, working conditions, education, community development, or health. These ideas are created with the goal of extending and strengthening civil society. And social impact is a positive, a significant positive change that addresses a pressing social challenge. Creating social impact is the result of a deliberate set of activities with a goal matching this definition. And social change can be defined as the way in which human interactions, relationships, behavior patterns, and cultural norms change over time. And these changes ultimately transform cultural and social institutions, concepts, and rules, which will inevitably impact society for the long haul. So now, as a designer focusing on social change, you know, I have to weave these concepts very deliberately into the work that, well, as I said, I'm an academic, so I have to weave this very deliberately into the work that my students do in their classes. You know, how are we going to work on projects that are social innovation, that lead to social impact and social change? So how do we do this? We do this by figuring out how to ask questions that create social change. And so over some of the next few slides, I'm going to share different ways that, different techniques that I've used to create questions or to ask questions that create change, as well as share some examples of projects that we've done as a result of some of these questions. So one thing is, I do say that I do design thinking, but I do design thinking through a critical perspective. So I do what I call critical design thinking, and then this criticality comes from critical thinking, critical inquiry, critical theory, critical pedagogy, lots of critics there, and critique, which is one thing that we do very well in design, you know, where we do our work, we reflect on it, and then we come back and we give ourselves feedback, we give our colleagues feedback. But the thread that runs through all of these different criticals here is that we're asking questions all the time. And we're trying to think, how can we do things differently and how can we do things better? Okay. And also, we're not assuming that what we know is in fact truth, you know, or that there's only one truth. You know, we are recognizing that there are many ways of doing things, and we're just asking questions about how can they be done even in an even better way. So one way of asking questions to create change is to change your perspective and ask these questions from a different perspective. So I shared a globe earlier on that showed my part of the world, and I've just shifted the globe to show that sometimes we have to figure out how can we assume this perspective from another point of view. I get this value, I get great value in working with collaborators from different parts of the world. And through the work with my collaborators from other parts of the world, I'm able to get some insights and perspectives that I wouldn't be able to have ordinarily. So, you know, I'm showing a perspective of Africa here. Currently, I'm not working with anyone from Africa, but I do have collaborators from India and Brazil, and these people help me change my point of view. So I don't only see the work that I'm doing as someone from the Caribbean or as someone who's resident in the United States. So that's one way of learning to ask questions, because outsider perspectives help change the way that we see the world. Another way of creating questions around change, I like to show this proverb when I talk about the work I do, because I do design work through something called an emancipatory lens. And this West African proverb helps people to understand what is this emancipatory lens. So the proverb is, until the lion has his or her own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. And in the work that I'm doing, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the perspective of the lion whose story is not often told? You know, what's a perspective that I really don't know about? How can I get the lion involved in telling the story instead of me telling the story for the lion? And this is me then trying to work in an emancipatory way where the people who are, in quotes, being researched are telling their story and are very involved in the research rather than me being an external researcher and working on people instead of with people. Another way of asking questions is questions to create change is about asking how your work will shift power. So I literally do this in the United States. This is called a Mad Lib, where you have to fill in the blanks. And I do this kind of Mad Lib activity sometimes, not sometimes, I actually do it for every project that I'm on, where I'm asking, where does this project shift power? Okay, so my whatever kind of work shifts power, and I literally ask from who to whom by doing what. And that helps me reflect on whether this work is actually creating change or not. So sometimes the work will be shifting power because, for example, the class that I teach this semester, the community members came to our university and said, hey, this is what we want you to be working on this semester. You guys always come and you tell us what research project you're going to do, but this time we're telling you what the research project is, and then this is a way of shifting power, okay? Or sometimes the power might shift to the students because the students are the ones who are choosing X, Y, or Z, but I have to ask myself all the time, does the work shift power in the way that it's structured? And then I have an idea that I am creating some change in that work. I'm going to share now a quote by Toni Morrison from 1998. All utopias are described by people who are not allowed in. And this is a lead into another way that I am using creating questions around creating change, where I am using a method called critical utopian action research, which is really just about asking these three simple questions in the work that we're doing. And then I'm asking these questions in a collaborative way where I'm working with people to see, okay, what is wrong? Giving people space to really acknowledge where the problems are, because sometimes in the design thinking work that we're doing, we don't actually give people a space to be critical and say, oh, whatever, life is awful, you know. So sometimes I intentionally create this space for people to say, okay, what is wrong? Then I create methods where we are co-creating a future and we're describing a utopia and deciding where do we want to go? What is this utopia that we're looking for? And then we're asking at the end, how can our dreams become reality? And in this method is critical, it's future focused, it's action oriented, it creates a sense of urgency for people who may otherwise feel disempowered. So I use this method often because I live in places where people feel disempowered. And so I've decided that this is an appropriate approach. And then a fifth way of asking questions to create change is to actually ground the work in the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. There are 17 goals, and pretty much, maybe it's an overstatement to say any problem around change is here within the goals, but I've found that using a rights-based approach, so that is the Sustainable Development Goals, the rights of the child, the Declaration of Human Rights, using this rights-based approach helps us think about ways that we can make change. And it is a question that people can ask about their own work. You know, what questions can you ask about your own work related to the Sustainable Development Goals? And so how does this look in practice? So in this next part of the presentation, I am going to share some examples of what this looks like in practice. This semester, my class, actually for most of this year, 2 classes focused on Sustainable Development Goal number 3, good health and well-being. This started with, as I mentioned in an earlier, on an earlier slide, this started with a concern by members of the community that I live in New Orleans, who said, you know what, with this COVID-19 pandemic, we really need for people to be thinking about good health and well-being. And so out of that came the question, how might we support New Orleanians to have access to good health and well-being? And then there was in brackets the question of, especially in the context of this COVID-19 pandemic. And so the students who participated in this project came up with a wide range of solutions. We interpreted good health and well-being in many different ways. We looked at mental health, access to play, access to food, access to fitness, spiritual health. So we didn't only look at solutions around food, but we thought of solutions in many different areas. And though many of the final projects focused around food and recipe sharing, community gardening. New Orleans is a city with a strong culture around socializing and parties. And so actually several of the students created block parties around health and then public fitness sessions. And so I'm sharing some of the concepts. This one, Grow NOLA, was about community gardening, but on different levels where they would send starter kits to families. Families could choose the size of the starter kit, right? Or eventually they could go to a public garden and participate in that. Another solution is this recipe gumbo, which gumbo is a local food in New Orleans. And so the idea, gumbo is a food where everything is, it's a big mix of ingredients. And so the idea of recipe gumbo is that people within the community would be able to mix their recipes onto the same platform. So even though we're social distancing, people would be able to share their recipes around good health and well-being on this platform with other people within the community. And then this Fuel Your Health is a project. It was a food truck around health. And so this food truck would offer, healthy food. There was an idea that there would be like fitness exercises around the food truck at specific times. There would be a doctor as well at the food truck at specific times. And so this was building on the cultural specificity of the place that we were in. Here's another example where we focused on a different sustainable development goal. And then this was with a much younger target audience. This project was done with 4th grade children in Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm from. And I start off with this quote: do you want to make these children angry? Because when I explained to the school board that we were going to use this rights-based approach and we were going to discuss the rights of the child, and then we were going to ask the children to think about things in their community that they wanted to fix, or things in their school that they wanted to fix. And then we were going to go into the design process and have the children design ways of getting to where they imagine they should be. The school board member responded and said, oh my goodness, you're going to make these children angry, because they're going to suddenly know, one, that they have rights, and then they're also going to be dissatisfied and angry with the situation that they were in. But I put this slide up because the fact is, change can make us angry, and then we can use that anger to move us to a different place. We can channel that anger into activism. None of the children got overly angry though in the exercise. So in the first part of the exercise, the children had to think about what they wanted, and this child's she did. This was after they had learned about the rights. And then this child made this commitment to himself: in my design, I will get greater access to the right to go to school. Here's another interesting drawing where a child was reflecting on the left on the current situation, and he says, well, this is not the best school because the sewage is smelly, which means that, yes, the school smells. And then the child drew this school in the future and says, this is the best school because it's not smelly. And so in that way, we were able to understand what was important to the children. And it was clear some of these are easy things to fix, but we were able to clearly identify where some change could be made. And then this last part of the activity, the children interviewed the adult on the compound who was a security guard, and then responded to the security guard's needs, and then designed a robot that would help that would actually clean the entire community. Also responding to the security guard's needs. The security guard complained about having to wake up early in the morning to go to church, and they designed a Skype church app to help the security guard. So I'm showing you how we can start with the Sustainable Development Goals and create things around change. Then a third example that I want to share is about reduced inequalities, which is goal number 10. Where in this activity, we took people to 2050 and we asked them to imagine life in a world where race was no longer an issue. And people shared in this project what they imagined in 2050. For example, they would not have to give their children the talk about how to act, or they wouldn't have to worry about police having to pull them over. They wouldn't have to worry about not having educators who looked like them. And so in this one, we're still using critical utopia and action research, where we're asking people to imagine 2050 in the future. And then afterwards, what we did in the class is we designed ways to get exactly to where we wanted to go in 2050. And we designed programs that could be implemented on the university campus that would then support race and equity in people's work. And then in this last example, also around equity, the question was, can we use design and the future to build shared experiences between the police and the community? So here's an image of a design workshop that happened between members of the New Orleans community and members of the police. The police weren't allowed to come to this workshop in uniform. So you actually look at the photograph and you have no idea who is the police and who are the community members. But the idea was to use design as well as a focus on utopia to now build relationships with the police and actually co-design some projects that could improve the relationships between the two and help improve the sense of security in the community. So I guess starting to sum up, how to be a relentless change agent. I went through the examples and the slides and all that, and I thought, okay, so what are some things that I could pull out? Dream about futures that we want and need, and then work actively towards getting them, and work with other people. Channel anger into activism, promote an agenda for change and transformation, give participants, because I work with communities, give participants more control of research and work agendas, be accountable to collaborators, focus on shifting existing power structures, favor long-term benefits over short-term goals. And then remember, design is a service and we must serve people. I'm sure I'm speaking I'm preaching to the choir here because we're probably a very large community of service designers, but sometimes we don't remember that we are doing a service for people. And some ways that we can be doing this: by changing our perspective, by understanding and including the underrepresented point of view, by intentionally shifting power, by using critical utopias to imagine a better world, and by using a rights-based approach, example, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Declaration of Human Rights, and the rights of the child. So I'm going to end off with a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, who said, "When I wondered if imagination could be necessary for revolution and transformation, you said yes. You said our dreams and visions matter. They are the way we make oppression temporary. And these are statements that I have to use to help remind me all the time that this is my mission or my manifesto. I am trying to make oppression temporary, and that's the change that I am focused on. And I hope that people will connect. So my name is Leslie Ann Noel, and people can connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter and reach out and give me some feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie Ann. That was really, really good. We have many, many questions for the both of you, so I guess we'll get started. If Carl's there as well, Carl Emil?
I'm here.
Hi. So I've got the first question for you. This is focused around the impact that COVID's had. So you mentioned that briefly in your presentation with regards to the potatoes, but we're curious, how has it impacted other businesses? So the restaurants and the small traders that we see, locked down, closed for weeks or not months. I'm just curious, how's that impacted you and the team?
Yeah. So well, first of all, of course it has impacted. I mean, our main services is really dependent on stores and retailers being open, because otherwise there is no magic bags to pick up. So in that case, it has actually, of course, impacted a lot of what we're trying to do. But at the same time, and that was also why I highlighted the project as well, I think we've also really seen, I think problems are a lot of times also wake-up calls for creativity. So we looked into different ways that we could actually try and make the most out of this situation still. So that is on one side, the potatoes. Another thing we did was a project we called We Care, where we essentially let different stores sell their regular food as sort of like a takeaway solution through our app, pro bono as well, because we're really also thinking this is more, this is a bigger thing than us as well, and we really also wanna help out as much as possible. So of course it has really impacted everything that we do a lot, but I think at the same time, we've been really trying to make the most of it and trying to help out wherever possible. I also think, on the other hand, another thing that we've seen is that it's also a thing that has made people actually obviously stay at home, but then also cook more in the homes. And what we've seen is there's also been more respect towards the food as well, and trying to use what you have, etc. So it's also like regained the way that we look at resources, etc.
Kind of relates slightly to the previous two talks where we touched on the fact that it almost takes a crisis for real innovation to happen, and I can see that from what you're talking about. So the next question for Leslie Ann. There's a comment here that some education systems don't teach critical theory, for example. And the question is, how can people that have been through those education systems, when they grow up, how can they change their mindsets to consider these things?
That's a big question. I didn't learn critical theory in my education. I had, like many designers, I had a very non-critical education where I was focusing on form and function and not really focusing on people. So, I mean, we can create that interest in social change later on in life. And, now is the best time to be learning any and everything. The information is easily available to us. I have a colleague who talks very often about the matrix of domination, which is more like critical theory language. But, sometimes it's important for us to think about it like that. What are the different areas of oppression that are affecting people on a day-to-day basis? And then how can we do our own work to ensure that these barriers are simply knocked down? So like, even if you're not formally interested in critical theory or you don't have that language, we can talk to people and find out about oppression. We can reflect on our own lives and think about where we might be impacted and where are we not impacted. Because, even that I've had to think about, where did I have some privilege that allowed me to go even further? And then how could someone else get access to that kind of privilege? So the information is out there, and it's out there actually in accessible ways. I'm thinking, I don't really want to mention specific tools, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking that, yes, the information is easily accessible, and there are communities where people are talking about oppression. One book that I can recommend, there is a book, Design Justice by Sasha Costanza-Chuck. And Sasha has a community around her where people are talking, I think there's a growing community of designers who are interested in critical theory and social change. And really, how does one find out about this stuff? Reach out and talk with other people who are thinking in a similar kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And I've got another question for Carl Emil. So we see supermarkets, for example, using technology to reduce prices of food so that they can sell as much as possible. I guess the fear here is, how do we then make sure that the very needy, the people that are without food, the homeless, etc., how do we make sure that these people are not overlooked if we're giving away food or if we're still selling it in some way or another?
It's a very, very big question, and I think I'm not sure exactly. I definitely think for the most part, in terms of the whole social aspect, for instance, we've worked together with different food banks, etc. I think the nature of the product, where you gain food at a reduced price, is also something that potentially also can help people. But at the same time, looking into the retailers and supermarkets specifically, and everything that's going on there, I think that we also have to question how are we building them, and how do we make sure that sustainable practices are also ensured throughout. And I really think that it's a big question and a big topic as well. So I think it will be difficult for me, or wrong for me, to try and sit here that I have the perfect solution or way to go about it. But I do think in general that a lot of the different stores that we have, and a lot of different retailers, a lot of different supermarkets are really based on consumption and accessibility and everything around that. And I think we're just now starting to realize as well that, in terms of food waste, for instance, this whole buy two for one's price, is it really good in terms of, like, if you don't need the extra cucumber and then you go home to waste it as well. So I think on multiple levels, it's just very important that we also try and take a look at and evaluate how do we build the supermarket of the future, for instance, to make sure that it makes sense on all levels.
Apologies for hitting you both with a big question, one after another. So I've got a question for both of you, and it's based on the design mindsets that you mentioned earlier on. How can people keep those fresh in their mind? So it's fine to see them on screen and people can think, okay, I have these design mindsets. It's probably also just as easy for them to lose them at the same time. Do you know what I mean? How can people keep these design mindsets fresh and always at the top of thought? Feel free, either one of you. It's a question for both of you.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, Carl, I'm just going to jump in. So I think that sometimes we have to let go of the mission that, like sometimes we are like so mission focused, but every now and again we have to figure out how we intentionally building in playful approaches So I started off my presentation saying that I'm an academic, so I know that I might have a little bit more time to play, and I take advantage of that. And I try to get other people to play, So how do we keep this fresh? I think we have to be drawing inspiration from a lot of different places, build in time for us to be inspired, to be playful. Sometimes I am designing games to make me think differently. I am radically pivoting the project to think, okay, what's a different perspective, collaborations with other people, so other people also help to keep you fresh. And I know the other place, of getting stuck in that mode. So I think that one way of doing it is intentionally making sure you are building in the other creative peaks so that you don't get stuck.
Yeah, and I would also say, I mean, one thing that we've always done at Too Good To Go is really also to try and challenge everything and challenge the status quo as well. So, I mean, as a small startup, it's not like you are sitting around and cutting everything into big frameworks, etc. But what you do have is a lot of people with a lot of passion, and what we have then tried to do is whenever we've had a challenge or a problem, just ask a lot of questions and try to understand what are some of the different solutions to them. Whereas, I think there are so many different challenges that we've tried to face, but I think it's important to highlight that there is no right way, essentially, and the right way might come from anyone. So I would say, instead of saying, how do we keep these principles fresh in mind, I would say it's more a general pursuit of trying to make things better that has helped us. And then based on the project or based on the problem that we're trying to solve, that's when we found different ways to go about it and try and solve it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I've got another question for both of you again. So there's going to be a lot of young designers probably starting out in their career watching this, and they probably recognize that wherever they are in the world, whether they're in a large organization or a small business, they probably recognize that maybe change is needed, whether it's in terms of sustainability or something along those lines. I'm just curious, what advice could you give those people who are starting out in their career and they recognize change is needed, but they're maybe not feeling in a position of speaking up about it?
So maybe I can start off on this. I think one thing that's very evident to me is that you sort of you have to be very impatient in the short term and very patient in the long term, I think. So you have to figure out if there are certain change that you really want to make. What is the whole big picture? I mean, what is the utopia that we talked about that we want to get to? And then in the short term, I would say just try and go at it and try different things and really get your hands dirty in that kind of sense. And trust in your vision. I mean, I think good solutions can come from anywhere. And I think as designers and as, if you want to be a person to drive change, you also have to really believe in the bigger vision and why you're really doing it at the end of the day too. So just if it's something that you're really passionate about and really believe in, I would just say go at it and stick to it, because you can try and plan it out, but it's never going to work out that way anyway. So just try and go at it and trust and believe in the long term and to be patient.
Yeah, I'm going to build on what Carl Emil says and say something very similar. Just get that idea out there, just whatever is bothering you, act on it, do something. As Carl Emil says, it won't be perfect, but you have to get your idea out there and get some feedback on your idea. And then you can keep iterating. I like to encourage people to think about manifestos, so what's their own personal manifesto? What's the change that they really want to see? And then just chip away at that change little by little and not be bothered by people who say no, it can't be done, because there will be a lot of people around who say, it's always been like this, so it has to be like this. And the reality is, no, it doesn't, and so if people find things that need to be changed, they need to work on them and maybe see if they can galvanize a community around the work that they're doing, because other people will probably be seeing that same change that is needed and would be willing to support them.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like a two-pronged approach. You work on yourself, work on your own manifesto, build that narrative, but at the same time, slowly plant the seed, so to speak, on the other side of things. Super interesting. So I'm just conscious of time. One last question to you both, and it's a broad one. I'm sure the audience are interested to know what's the next big steps for you guys in terms of work, projects. What's the next big thing on your horizon? What are you looking to do next?
Okay. Sorry, Carl. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think for me, actually, I feel quite excited about a lot of the different projects and things that we have coming up. I think for us, for the most part, it's really, the way that a lot of people know us and perceive us is really as the application and as the app. And I very much look forward to really everything that we do beyond the app as well. And really try to show these different projects and in general. I mean, I'm very passionate about a lot of the things that we have coming up. Another one specifically, which I also mentioned in my talk, was the whole new YouTube endeavors that we are going into. So it's really exciting, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to look throughout Europe and really highlight different people and inspirational stories across countries. So in one side, it might be a farmer in Sweden that we have right now, and then we have the Rucker brothers who are building Can Rucker and the Michelin stars, and they also tell their story from their point of view. And really, whenever we've built that, we have this whole vision to have so many different people who are passionate and really value food across the world to share their stories, etc. So I feel really excited about how that is going to develop.
Well, I'm excited about your stories, Carl. So I'm working, I work on design research methods and kind of using creative and playful methods to research things that might not be creative and playful. And so I'm just starting a COVID research project with a colleague of mine, where we are trying to see how to use design research methods like, or some anthropology methods that we've adapted in a designerly way. But how can we understand people's experience of the COVID-19 pandemic? And then how can we use this to determine further research? So like, how can we use tools that people know, like photo elicitation, even what I described today, critical utopian action research, how can we get people to talk about their experience of the pandemic? And then we're going to channel the feedback to our local public health organizations so that they will fund additional research around the pandemic. And what we're actually discovering is that obviously, or not so obviously, the additional research is not only health related. Like when we're doing our workshops, we're finding out about the stress of women and the issues around childcare, and so we're using these very creative approaches to find additional areas for research.
Excellent. They both sound super interesting in terms of roadmaps, and that is something I'm definitely going to keep my eye on. So that's all the time we have for you two, and I just want to say thank you, because these have been really great talks, and I'm sure the audience have enjoyed it. Lots of great questions. So yeah, I just want to say thank you again.
Thanks to you. It's been an honor to be here.
Excellent.
Thank you as well.
All right. Thanks again. Okay, on that note, I will introduce Isabel Roy. She's here with us again. So Isabel is the president of the World Design Weeks. I just wanted to ask, this has been super interesting.
Yeah.
I've got some thoughts and key takeaways, and I was going to ask you the same. Have you got any sort of, I see patterns emerging. There's a lot of talk about self-reflection, huge amount of talk of self-reflection and the need for these networks and these other fields to come together. Yet if we can't self-reflect, how can we build these networks? I just think it's like, out of all the talks, that seems to be like the strong theme that's emerging.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think they have been very inspiring talks and very interesting. And I want to thank all the speakers, and I want to thank you, Adam, especially for the moderation of the session of yesterday and today's session. And I want to thank also Inge for making this fantastic program possible. For me, I think there are two main words, that is collective versus individual. So starting yesterday about the empathy, and that I was reading also that Emma published some information about that empathy is going down, is decreasing, which I was really surprised on reading this, because it looks like with the pandemic and everything, empathy has to grow and we have to be all more, it's decreasing. So it's the individual, the me, versus the collective and the community. It's something we have to work. All the speakers have referred to this. Nick especially also was talking about the collective design for collective benefits. We had a great example with Christian. The ambition of having a world with no food waste, of course, is an individual thing we have all to do, but it's a collective effort. So I think it's a very important moment that we need to work together, try to cooperate, try to listen to the others, and try to make our best in order to make collective projects. Mm-hmm. Well, I try to be optimistic. I think that, and Nick also was saying, this pandemic, this current situation is maybe one of the big challenge on design terms, but also as humanity of our generation. Mm-hmm. So, let's work on this. And I think that all the inspiring talks give us some tips on how to tackle these issues. I wanted also to say, because Carl Emil was making reference to B Corp, to this association of 3,000 companies around the world. B Corp is member of Barcelona Design Center through their Spanish brand, which is B Lab Spain. And next week we have a talk here also at the Roca Gallery about redesigning businesses with impact. I'm sorry, it's in Spanish. It will be in Spanish. So, but if anybody wants to register, I think it will be also, because it's on the same line. I mean, we have companies, very great initiatives like Too Good To Go, which is how to make business from something that will, of course, improve and have a better world. And you make business on this. Of course, now they are suffering because restaurants and bars are closed, but also small shops, local shops are still open. So I think that we need to work on this.
Yeah, and it's that moment of innovation that comes out of the crisis.
Of course.
So,
of course. And it's what I have to say. I mean, it's I think it's very inspiring, and I will heard all the speech again, because I think there are some. I like it also very much, the project of the food truck on health. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very interesting project, and I think that's something that it has to be maybe in each city around the world. Yeah. I mean, a food truck that goes around the world on health, on food and health, and also with food waste. So
completely.
Well, I'm happy that we have chosen this topic this year for the Sustainable Development Goals, and which was something that we already decided before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I mean, was something that we start thinking last year at the end of the Barcelona Design Week, and say, okay, next year that we are starting a decade of action, we will focus on this. Mm-hmm. I think we make a good choice.
Very timely.
I think that Think, Design, Act is what we have to do. Yeah. So I'm happy.
Excellent.
I'm happy.
If you're happy, I'm happy.
Yes.
So on that note, I just want to say thank you again.
Yeah,
And
thank you again to
you-
everybody. Thank you for people following us. And we look forward the next edition next year here in Barcelona all together, not only online, maybe online and...
Maybe a hybrid.
Yeah, maybe hybrid. I think it's our future for the next month,
I would agree.
hybrid events.
For sure.
So thank you to everybody.
Yep. And yeah, thank you and look forward to seeing you all next year, hopefully. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye bye.